Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, Ebenezer Scrooge sat busy in his counting house, the door open so he might keep an eye upon his clerk Bob Cratchit, who was copying letters in a dismal cell beyond.
"A Merry Christmas, Uncle!" cried a cheerful voice. It was Scrooge's nephew.
"Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!"
"Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure."
"I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough."
"Come now, what right have you to be dismal? For I have always thought of Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. And though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it."
As Scrooge's nephew left, a portly gentleman came in, referring to a list in his hands, and asked, "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?"
"Marley died 7 years ago," said Scrooge, "on this very night."
"Oh, well, Mr. Scrooge, at this festive season of the year, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some provision for the poor and destitute."
"Are there no prisons? Are the workhouses still in operation?"
"Oh, they are both very busy. So some of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. What shall I put you down for?"
"Nothing. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. Those who are badly off must go to the workhouse."
"Some would rather die."
"If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon."
Seeing it would be useless to pursue his point, the portly gentleman withdrew. And as it was now nearly the hour for shutting up, Scrooge spoke to his clerk, Bob Cratchit.
"You want all day tomorrow, I suppose?"
"If quite convenient," said Bob.
"It's not convenient, and not fair that I pay a day's wages for no work."
The clerk observed, "It's only once a year."
"Then be here all the earlier the next morning," said Scrooge.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and then went home to bed. And it was then he heard a clanking noise deep down below, as if someone were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the cellar. Next, the cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and the noise grew louder on the floor below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. Then, without a pause, an apparition came through the heavy door, dragging a chain made of cash boxes, keys, and padlocks.
"How now?" said Scrooge, caustic as ever. "What do you want with me?"
In life, said the ghost, I was your partner, Jacob Marley, and I wear the chain I forged in that life. I have no rest, no peace, and at this time of the rolling year I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode?
Scrooge was much dismayed to hear the spectre's words. "Jacob," he said imploringly, "you were always a good friend to me. Speak comfort to me."
I have none to give, Ebenezer, but I have come to warn you that you have yet a chance of escaping my fate. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, and the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate.
"Couldn't I take 'em all at once?" said Scrooge, "and have it over with?"
Look to see me no more, Ebenezer. And for your own sake, remember what has passed between us.
I saw a fair maiden sitting and sing. She lulled a little child, a sweet lording. Lulling my liking, my dear son, my sweeting. Lulling my dear heart, mine own dear darling.
That in all the Lord is he, that made all nothing. Of all the Lord is he, is Lord, of every king he's king.
Lulling my liking, my dear son, my sweeting. Lulling my dear heart, mine own dear darling.
There was mickle melody at the childer's birth. Though the songsters were heavenly, they made a mickle mirth.
Lulling my liking, my dear son, my sweeting. Lulling my dear heart, mine own dear darling. Angels bright they sang that night and said unto that child, blessed and be thou, and so be she that is so meek and mild. Lulling my liking, my dear son, my sweeting. Lulling my dear heart, mine own dear darling.
Pray we now to that child as to his mother dear. God grant them all his blessing that now maken cheer.
Lulling my liking, my dear son, my sweeting. Lulling my dear heart.
When Scrooge awoke from a deep but troubled sleep, it was still dark, and the chimes of a neighbouring church were striking the 4 quarters. Then the hour bell sounded with a dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtain of his bed was drawn aside. Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who had drawn them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Scrooge asked, "Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?"
The voice was soft and gentle. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Rise and walk with me.
Scrooge did so, but seeing the spirit made towards the window, clasped its robe and objected. "Oh, I'm a mortal and liable to fall."
Bear but a touch of my hand here, said the spirit, laying it upon Scrooge's heart. And as he spoke, they passed through the wall and into a busy thoroughfare of the city, where it was plain enough by the dressing of the shops that it was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Knew it? Oh, why, I was apprenticed here.
They went in, and at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a high desk, Scrooge cried out in great excitement.
Why, it's old Fezziwig.
Old Fezziwig it was, and at that moment he called out in a comfortable, jovial voice, "Ebenezer, Dick, no more work tonight, Christmas Eve. Let's have room for dancing." Then in came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the three Mrs. Fezziwig, beaming and lovable. And in came the 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In they all came, and away they all went. 20 couples at once, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of working.
At Christmas time, all Christians sing to hear the news the angels bring. At Christmas time, all Christians sing to hear the news the angels bring. News of great joy, news of great mirth, news of our merciful King's birth. And sing along, sing a merry Christmas song, and saucy ships come sailing by on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day.
And who was on those ships so free?
On Christmas Day in the morning, our Saviour Christ and His Lady. On Christmas Day, on Christmas Day.
And they sailed into Bethlehem
On Christmas Day in the morning. Dance and sing along, sing a merry Christmas song.
Then why should men on earth be so sad, since our Redeemer made us glad?
Yes, why should we on earth be so sad, since our Redeemer made us glad? When from our sin He set us free, all for to gain our liberty.
Sing, sing along, sing a merry Christmas song.
Good Christian men rejoice with heart and soul and voice. Give ye heed to what we say. Jesus Christ is born today. Ox and ass before Him bow, and He is in the manger now. Christ is born today. Christ is born today. And sing along, sing a merry Christmas song. When sin departs before His grace, then life and health come in His place.
When sin departs before His grace, then life and health come in its place.
Angels and men joy may sing, all for to see the newborn grace. And sing along, sing a merry Christmas song.
Born a King in Bethlehem's plain, gold we ring to crown Him again. King forever, ceasing never over us all to reign.
Oh, star of night, star of royal beauty bright, west was leading, still was leading, guide us to thy perfect light. And sing along, sing a merry Christmas song. For out of darkness we have light, which made the angels sing His light.
For out of darkness we have light, which made the angels sing His light.
Glory to God and peace to men, now and forevermore. Amen.
Sing along,
Dance and sing along, sing a merry Christmas song.
Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge sensed that the church bell was again upon the stroke of 1. As it rang out, he became aware of a blaze of ruddy light, and began to think that the source of this light might be in the adjoining room.
It was his own room. There was no doubt about that. But it had undergone a transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright, gleaming berries glistened. Crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there.
In easy state upon the couch in Scrooge's sitting room sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who said, "I am the ghost of Christmas present. I am sure you have never seen the like of me before."
"Never," said Scrooge, and then added, "Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night and learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it."
So they went out together, and the ghost led him straight to the house of Scrooge's clerk, which they entered, invisible as before. Mrs. Cratchit was laying the tablecloth, assisted by Belinda, the second of her daughters, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes. Then in came Bob the father, his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
When the meal was over, Bob said, "I don't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, moderate size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was indeed sufficient for the whole family. And as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of bone upon the dish, we hadn't ate it all." Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, me dears," which the family re-echoed, and Tiny Tim, last of all, said, "God bless us, everyone."
Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat. Please put a penny in the old man's hat. Yes, Christmas is coming and the goose is getting fat. Please put a penny in the old man's hat. If you haven't got a penny, a halfpenny will do. A halfpenny will do. A halfpenny will do.
But a penny's better,
A penny or two are better.
or three,
Or more. Yes, Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat. Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat.
Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat. Please put a penny in the goose is getting fat.
If you haven't got a penny, a halfpenny will do.
If you haven't got a penny, a halfpenny will do. If you haven't got a penny, a penny will do. If you haven't got a penny,
Scrooge noted that Tiny Tim sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool, and Bob held his withered little hand as if he dreaded that he might be taken away.
"Spirit," said Scrooge, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live."
"I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. But what then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it, and decrease the surplus population."
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Hush, my dear, lie still and slumber. Holy angels guard thy rest. Heavenly blessings falling on thy head.
By this time, it was getting dark and snowing heavily, and the brightness of the roaring fires in the kitchens and parlours was wonderful. It was a surprise to Scrooge, amidst the bustle, to hear a hearty laugh he recognised, and suddenly to find himself in a dry, gleaming room, the Spirit standing smiling by his side and listening to his very own nephew.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, but not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences do carry their own punishment.
There followed a game of blind man's buff with Topper, the nephew's close friend, first to wear the blind. But Scrooge no more believed that Topper was really blind than he believed he had eyes in his boots. The way he went after the plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage. Knocking down the fire irons, tumbling over chairs, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there went Topper. He always knew where the plump sister was, and simply wouldn't try to catch anyone else.
As I walked down the road at set of sun, the lambs were coming homewards one by one. I heard a sheep bell softly calling them along the little road to Bethlehem. Beside an open door as I drew nigh, I heard sweet Mary sing a lullaby. She sang about the lambs at close of day, and rocked her tiny king among the hay. Across the air the silver sheep bell rang. The lambs are coming home, sweet Mary sang. Your star of gold, your star of gold is shining in the sky. So sleep, my little king, go lullaby. As I walked down the road at set of sun, the lambs were coming homewards one by one. I heard a sheep bell softly calling them along the little road to Bethlehem.
This time Scrooge awoke to hear the church bell strike 12, and as the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him, with nothing visible save one outstretched hand.
Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?
The Spirit now led Scrooge into an obscure part of the town, which he recognised as a churchyard. The Spirit stood amongst the graves and pointed down to one.
Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or the shadows of the things that may be only?
Still, the ghost pointed to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it and read upon the neglected stone his own name.
Spirit, assure me that I yet may change these shadows by an altered life. I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year.
Scrooge held up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, and saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank and dwindled down into a bedpost.
Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends. Scrooge opened his bedroom window and put out his head. No fog, no mist, sweet, fresh air. What's today, my fine fellow?
Today, returned the boy. Why, Christmas Day.
Do you know the poulterer's in the next street but one?
What should I by deed?
An intelligent boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? The big one?
The one as big as me?
What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck, go and buy it and tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sent it, and it's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
Scrooge dressed himself in his best and went out into the streets. He had not gone far when, coming towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before.
My dear sir, said Scrooge, taking the gentleman by both hands, allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness to...
Oh, Lord bless me, cried the gentleman. Are you serious?
If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you.
Once in royal David's city stood a lowly cattle shed, where a mother laid her baby in a manger for his bed. Mary was that mother mild, Jesus Christ her little child. He came down to earth from heaven, who is God and Lord of all, and his shelter was a stable, and his cradle was a stall, with the poor and needy
the office next morning. If he could only be there to catch Bob Cratchit coming late. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. It was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time when Scrooge greeted him.
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. It's only once a year, sir. And I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. You see, this enormous turkey...
I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. Yes, I'll raise your salary and assist your poor family.
Scrooge was better than his word, and to Tiny Tim he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the old city knew. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. May that be truly said of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.